At 4 a.m., Edric left me, Aurelia, at a freezing train station so he could pop champagne with his pregnant mistress. My mother-in-law called me a mistake. My best friend sold my secrets. But they never read the original will, and they'll never forget what I did next. I woke at 3:42 a.m. to the sound of the engine in the driveway. Its vibration humming through the walls of our home in Portland. I didn't bother putting on socks, just slipped out the door as I had done so many times when Edric said something was important. I still believed him. I believed in us. But something felt wrong. The dashboard glow cast his face in shadows. He didn't look at me. He told me simply, "Dress quickly. We're going to Union Station." On the drive, I watched the dashboard clock flick from 3:50 to 3:59 to 4 o'clock. A message pulsed on his screen, "So happy for you and the baby." I stiffened. I asked quietly, "What baby?" He looked away, steering without a word. I felt nausea, not from the cold or the early hour, but the idea I was about to be left behind. We pulled into the station parking lot. He grabbed my suitcase, left his own bag in the back seat, opened the door. He didn't help me step out. His coat collar turned up, his breath visible in the cold air. At 4 a.m., he walked away. I stood alone. I followed him. I yelled his name. He turned once, eyes blank, then continued across the platform. My feet slid on the ice. I fell. I grasped the metal bench for balance while commuters arrived. Coffee in hand. Oblivious. A uniformed attendant told me to move along. I tried to say, "This is my husband." But my voice vanished. He boarded a train. I watched the doors close. He deliberately left me sitting there. It wasn't a matter of miscommunication. It was execution. My phone flickered at 15% battery. No signal. I searched for a familiar number, found none. I texted him 2 days ago, "We'll figure things out." Right? That seemed quaint now. I looked at the suitcase on the bench, just socks. Toothbrush. No charger. No ID. No wedding ring. He didn't forget. He intentionally excluded the parts of me that mattered. I sank into the bench. Breath shallow. Body shaking. This isn't heartbreak, I thought. This is betrayal dressed in civility. Years earlier, I remember him whispering as I lay under our quilt, "You'll never be alone again." Ori. I swallowed that promise tonight like a bitter pill. I thought of the dinners I skipped. The silent phone calls I ignored. The headlines I chose not to read. I had traded my voice for trust. Trust is currency. And I just got bankrupted. I pulled myself up. Snow crunched under my boots. A shift began inside me. I would not wait forever. I would not vanish. Have you ever been left somewhere you didn't expect to be, emotionally or physically? Tell me your story. I closed my eyes briefly. The station lights hazy like distant stars. My name went unspoken for hours. My luggage sat idle, but I realized that being left wasn't the end, it could be the start. The cold had settled deep in my bones. But I didn't feel it anymore. I just watched the rails, still vibrating faintly where the train had disappeared into the horizon. The last place he existed in my world was now just empty air. People walked past me, business travelers with roller bags. A young couple holding hands. A man clutching a coffee too tightly. No one stopped. No one saw me. I glanced at my phone again. 2%. No bars. Even the digital world had left me alone. The announcement system echoed names and destinations as if nothing had happened. As if the world didn't just erase the only person I knew to call home. Minutes bled together like watercolor in the cold. I didn't know what time it was. Only that it was no longer yesterday. And I was still sitting there, waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. I must have looked like a shadow of a girl, still. Quiet, misplaced. That's probably why she approached me. A woman in her 50s. Cropped hair, canvas coat, a lunch bag in one hand. She paused just long enough to assess. Then turned away. Moments later, 2 security officers strode toward me. "Ma'am?" the taller one asked. "We've had a report of a young woman looking distressed. Do you have identification?" I fumbled with the zipper on my bag. There was no wallet, no ID, nothing with my name on it. Just what he packed for me, socks. A toothbrush. Folded shirts that weren't mine. The younger officer opened the case further. "Do you live in the area? Are you with family?" I tried to answer. My husband, he dropped me here. But the words sounded fictional. Like a script from a bad soap opera. They both looked at each other. Do you have a phone? One asked. It's dead. Are you a minor? No. The younger one pulled out a small notebook. We might need to notify social services if we can't verify your identity. Can you give me your name? Somewhere to my left, a teenage girl tugged on her mom's sleeve and whispered, maybe she's crazy. That hurt more than I expected. I stood quickly, my suitcase tipping sideways. I said Edric's full name. He's my husband, Edric Vance. The officers looked at each other again. We'll check. Do you have any other numbers we can try? I didn't. I couldn't remember anyone's number. The digital leash that tied me to the world had snapped. I typed in a name, an old friend from high school, but before I could hit call, the screen went black. My heart raced. Please, I said, but I didn't know what I was pleading for. They stepped back, speaking quietly. We can take her to a youth shelter. One said, not even trying to hide it. The room swam. My hands shook. I crouched down, hugging my knees, gasping for air I couldn't seem to pull into my lungs. That's when she appeared, a woman I didn't know. She moved past without fanfare, dropped a scarf beside me. You don't belong here, she whispered, then walked away. That phrase dug into me. Not because it was unkind, but because it reminded me I looked like someone who did. As the officers prepared to intervene, another voice, calm and certain, cut through the noise. Excuse me, officers. A woman in her 60s stepped forward. Her coat was plum-colored wool, buttoned to the neck. She wore no makeup, but something about her face held authority. She's with me. They turned toward her. Do you have ID? Ma'am? She handed it over, along with a business card. I didn't see what it said. I'd like a moment alone with her, if that's all right. Reluctantly, the officers nodded and stepped away. She sat beside me. She didn't touch me, didn't speak for a moment. Then, you don't have to say anything. But someone asked me to find you. Someone who still cares. I turned to her, tried to read her expression. There was no pity in it, just stillness, resolve. Why? I asked. She didn't answer that. Can I just sit for a while? I asked instead. She nodded. Of course. She sat, and for the first time since Edric vanished, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't trust her, but I had no one else. I didn't trust her, but I had no one else. The officers stepped back reluctantly after she spoke to them again, some whispered exchange. A nod, her calm assurance settling the tension like smoke fading from a room. I stood slowly, suitcase dragging behind me, and followed the woman in the plum coat out the station doors. Her Cadillac was old, polished, its silver paint dulled by years but still elegant. I slid into the passenger seat without a word. My hands gripped the handle of my bag like it was an anchor to whatever identity I had left. She didn't talk, didn't ask questions, just turned the key and merged onto the quiet highway. Only the hum of tires on pavement and the faint crackle of old jazz from the radio filled the space between us. Fog hung low over the morning streets. Familiar street names passed by. But I felt like a ghost in my own city, watching a life that had already moved on without me. I kept my eyes fixed on the window. She hummed along to the tune. Soft, almost like she was keeping herself company. You don't have to trust me today, she said after a long stretch. Just rest. I looked straight ahead. People who say that usually have something to hide. She didn't respond, just kept driving. Eventually, the questions inside me pushed their way out. How did you know my name? Why were you at the station? She glanced at me, then back to the road. I knew your grandmother, long ago. We worked together when her family ran Hartfield Shipping. The name barely rang a bell. My grandmother had been a whisper in our house, someone mentioned. Never invited. Her story sounded smooth, but too smooth, like something practiced. I shifted in my seat. My phone was still dead. No charger, no signal. I watched the exits tick by and began counting them backward. 1, 2, 3, thinking how I'd run if I had to. I'm not here to hurt you, she said, catching my tension. Someone asked me to find you before the wrong people did. I turned to her sharply. What do you mean, wrong people? She didn't elaborate, just said, You've been left in the open. That's dangerous, whether you believe it or not. We drove in silence for another few miles before she pulled into a rest stop. Quiet and empty save for one coffee truck and a row of leafless trees. She stepped out and walked a short distance. Phone at her ear, voice hushed. I opened the glove box out of instinct. Inside was a photo, a younger version of this woman, Merla. She'd said her name was, standing beside a woman I recognized from wedding photos, Edric's mother. Marjorie Vance. I was holding the picture when Merla returned. She didn't look surprised. You knew his family? She sighed. Yes, long ago. So why help me? I'm not loyal to Marjorie. Never was. Your grandmother, Eloise, she reached out months ago. Tried to find you. Edric intercepted every message. The world tilted. You're saying, my husband kept me from my own family? He wanted you isolated, she said gently. That's how control works. Darling, first, they separate you, then they rewrite what you think you know. A silence filled the space that wasn't quiet at all. It pulsed with rage. Not grief, rage. She got back behind the wheel and started driving again. Slower this time. We passed a diner, and she asked, coffee? I nodded. When we stopped, she handed me her phone. You can call her now. I'll give you space. I stared at the device. Strange how something so ordinary could feel like a lifeline. I hesitated. Then I dialed the number she read out for me, my grandmother's landline. Still alive after all this time. Hello? A voice croaked on the other end. I couldn't speak. Aurelia? Is that really you? The words cracked something in me. I pressed the phone to my chest and cried. Silently, like I had in the station. But this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was contact. I'm here, I finally whispered. Her voice trembled. Come home, baby, please. Merla turned her head away politely. Hands resting on the steering wheel. Not listening but close enough to hear if things went wrong. I want to, I said, but on one condition. No one tells Edric I'm alive. Not yet, not until I say so. There was a pause. Then, all right, you have my word. And just like that, something inside me clicked. A small, defiant shift. I wasn't the girl sobbing on a bench anymore. I had a name, a grandmother, a place to go, and something Edric no longer had, my silence. As we crossed the bridge into Lake Oswego, fog rising from the water like ghosts in retreat, I saw a mansion resting high on the hill. Its dark silhouette struck me like a memory I never had. That was the place, I knew, where every secret I'd been denied lived, waiting. The road curved upward through the fog, flanked by oak trees older than any living Hartfield. When the estate finally came into view, its thousand-window facade shimmered in the late morning light like something out of a dream, one that didn't belong to me. The Cadillac rolled to a stop before twin iron gates that parted without sound. Merla said nothing as we crossed onto the property. My reflection caught briefly in the glass, and I remembered Edric's voice whispering once, I'll always protect you. The echo felt cruel now. Inside, the foyer was cathedral high, air heavy with wax polish and history. Portraits watched from every wall, stern men, delicate women, painted smiles hiding what must have been entire lives of secrets. A woman stepped forward from the archway. Gray hair pinned neatly, a faint tremor in her voice. Aurelia. It was her, Eloise Hartfield. My grandmother. I hadn't seen her since I was a child. Yet the recognition hit instantly. Bone deep. She reached for my hand but stopped halfway. Unsure if she had the right. You're home, she said, and though the words were kind, they felt conditional, like I still needed to earn it. A butler appeared, tall, efficient, offering a keycard embossed with gold. The Nora suite is prepared. Miss, everything you requested has been arranged. I blinked. I didn't request anything. He bowed slightly. As you wish, miss. The suite looked staged for someone who'd been expected but never consulted. My suitcase sat untouched. On the nightstand, a familiar dining tray, the same brand Edric used, down to the folded napkin, waited beside an unplugged phone. Nothing here was accidental. Eloise led me into her study after a silent lunch. The walls were lined with old books, maps, and ledgers so heavy they seemed to groan under the weight of family business. She pushed a red leather file toward me. This, she said softly, was your father's doing. Inside were notarized documents, Hartfield shipping contracts. Dated decades back. I skimmed them until one line stopped me cold. Transfer of beneficiary rights, Aurelia Hartfield. Your father signed this when you were born. Eloise continued. You inherited 1/3 of this company. Edric and Marjorie managed it for you. The pages bore his signature, Edric Vance, in confident black ink. Mine was there too, forged in perfect imitation. So all of this, I said, voice cracking, his cars, his company dinners, his control, was bought with my inheritance? Eloise nodded slowly. He built his empire on your name, not his. Lightning flickered across the sky, thunder following like punctuation. Why tell me now? Because the house of cards is shaking, she replied, and you, my dear, are the wind. Later, wandering through corridors lined with marble and memory, I heard voices near the library. I froze. Marjorie Vance's accent, smooth as ever, floated through the door. If she finds the original will, our side collapses. A man's reply, low and clipped. Then we'll use the alternate version. She'll never know which is valid. I slipped away before they noticed. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Back in the study, Eloise sat reading. She looked up without surprise when I reappeared. Still want to leave? She asked. No, I said. I'll stay, but not as your guest. A faint smile crossed her lips. Then you should attend the board meeting this week. I will, I said, on my terms. She nodded once. That's the Hartfield way. That night, I sat by the window of the Nora suite. The city skyline faint beyond the trees. Somewhere beyond those lights, Edric was living as if I no longer existed. I wrote in my journal. I was given nothing but a label. Now I demand the truth. When I closed the book, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back didn't seem broken anymore. She seemed sharpened. No more acting helpless, I whispered. I picked up my phone. Merla had left a charger on the desk, and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. When the line clicked, I said, Drayton, I'm ready. He said nothing, but I knew he understood. I slipped into a navy blazer that belonged to my mother. The one Eloise had kept in storage. It fit perfectly, as if waiting for this day. At the doorway, I paused and looked back at the empty room. See you soon, I murmured, the ghost of a smile on my lips. This time, I'll bring you down. Have you ever discovered you were given someone else's story to live? What did you do next? When power hides in silence, how do you begin to reclaim it? The next morning, as I stepped into the boardroom, someone whispered, she shouldn't be here. That was how I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. The doors to the Hartfield library creaked as Eloise pressed her hand against a panel carved with ivy. One shelf slid aside to reveal a hidden chamber, a vault built behind rows of dusty books. She stepped inside first, the faint scent of cedar and varnish clinging to the cool air. I followed, my heels clicking softly on stone. It felt like a crypt more than a study. At the far end, mounted under a small spotlight, hung a brass plaque. I stepped closer and read the inscription, Jameson Hartfield, founder. Hartfield Shipping Co., my father. I blinked. Why is his name here? Why have I never seen this? Eloise, slower now, reached into a drawer and pulled out a cassette in a sealed envelope. The handwriting made my breath catch. For Aurelia, do not play until 2020. I stared at it, throat tightening. What is this? She handed it to me gently. Your birth changed everything. I found an old tape deck on the corner table. Pressed play. My father's voice crackled through the static. Angry and low. Robert, if you breathe a word about the original will, I swear I'll drag your sins into the daylight. Don't test me. Silence followed. I sat frozen. My father, threatening his own brother to keep a will secret? Eloise sat beside me, saying nothing, but her silence wasn't indifference, it was acknowledgement. And I couldn't tell which hurt more, what I'd heard or what had been kept from me all these years. Still, something inside me didn't break. It straightened. I took out the file from earlier. The one with blank spaces where my name should have been. I slid it across the desk. This is my exclusion, my erasure. Eloise looked down. When you were born, the board feared public scrutiny. They drafted an amendment to remove you from succession. Edric and Marjorie executed it. The pain flared, but it didn't feel helpless anymore. It felt focused. I remember what Edric said to me before he left. I murmured, "You don't matter anymore." I looked down at the papers. But I do. I always did. I clenched my fist and pressed it against my palm. The sting grounded me. I matter. I walked out of the vault, each step louder than the last, until I stood by the tall windows looking out at the water. The wind stirred the lake just like it stirred the certainty forming in my chest. Back in my suite, the light was dim, soft shadows stretching across the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photos on my dresser, my wedding day, the housewarming party, the holidays with Edric's hand always on my shoulder. So much of it had been staged. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Nolene Gray. She answered on the second ring. I believed him, I said, barely able to speak through the thickness in my throat. I believed everything he told me. Dr. Gray paused. Belief isn't weakness, Aurelia. It's a doorway. You walked through it. Now you get to decide what's on the other side. I didn't answer right away. Then I stood, walked to the full-length mirror, and removed my wedding ring. My hand trembled. The metal felt colder than ever before. I dropped it. The soft thud echoed in the still room. I was born to inherit. I whispered, not to disappear. I grabbed my phone again and scrolled through old photos, his smile. His gaze, his hand curled protectively around mine. How many of those moments were real? How many just well-lit illusions? One phrase floated up in my mind. My father's again. The only lasting gift you can give yourself is the truth. I opened my laptop, logged into my old law firm email. It had been dormant for months, untouched since the day Edric suggested I step away. Subject: confidential, Hartfield inquiry. Drayton, let's talk Monday. Bring everything. I attached scans of the signatures, the red folder, and the photo of the cassette tape. I packed the real folder into my bag and zipped it shut. As I headed toward the door, I saw Eloise in the hall. She looked at the bag, then at me. I intend to sit on that board by Friday, I said, voice even. She nodded. I'll support you, but this will change everything. That's the goal. I stepped outside. The evening air sliced across my skin, sharp and invigorating. My breath came out in pale clouds. And with every step forward, I left a part of my old self behind, quiet, obedient, waiting. Not anymore. I'm no longer the silent daughter. I said aloud, to no one. I'm the heir they tried to bury. Have you ever discovered your value was hidden, and you were expected to just be grateful? What did you do when you realized silence wasn't loyalty but erasure? When someone told you that you didn't matter, how did you reclaim your voice? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake until 3 a.m., thoughts spiraling like wildfire. And just before sleep claimed me, I dreamed of a boardroom. 12 chairs, one vote that would tip the balance. Mine. The city's skyline loomed behind the glass as the elevator rose. Each floor a countdown. I straightened my navy blazer and held the red leather folder like a shield. The last time I was at this building, I was introduced as Edric's wife. Now I was returning as something else entirely. The elevator chimed. 22nd floor. I stepped out onto polished marble. The lobby stretched into a panoramic view of downtown. But all I saw was Drayton Cole, already waiting, papers fanned across his open briefcase. He glanced up. Time to move. I nodded. As we crossed the corridor toward the main conference room, my mind flashed back to that metal bench at the train station. 4 a.m., alone. Cold. Forgotten. That ache had fermented into something sharper. Purpose. The glass doors opened. Inside, Marjorie and Edric were already seated. The board flanked both sides of the long table. Expressions unreadable. Edric glanced at me, mocking smirk in place. I caught the glint of his watch. 4:07 a.m. Not just a time. A message. I said nothing, just walked to the head of the table and took my seat. The room shifted. Drayton stood beside me and dimmed the lights. A projection lit the screen behind him, company records. A breakdown of the trust fund. One chart in particular held the room, shareholder signatures. Mine. Missing. The trust revision excluded Ms. Hartfield without consent or record. He began. Marjorie cleared her throat delicately. We are currently investigating an internal error. Nothing more. I stood. An error doesn't erase someone from their inheritance for 14 years. My voice didn't shake. That's not a mistake. It's design. A ripple of whispers moved down the table. Edric's jaw tightened. One of the older board members leaned toward another. She's read everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out the red leather folder. I placed it on the table with the same reverence one might offer a blade. It landed with a quiet thump that seemed louder than anything spoken. Marjorie blinked. I brought the originals, I said. The air stilled. Marjorie called for an executive session, typical power move, and Edric tapped his phone. The screen behind us went black. Drayton's eyes flicked to me. I didn't move. You were hoping I'd go away again, I said, still standing, but I didn't, and I won't. Edric leaned back, arms crossed. You think you can just waltz in and claim what's mine? I smiled. Not yours, mine, what you helped bury. Board members turned. The energy shifted again, leaning forward. Alert. Drayton tapped his tablet. Another screen lit up, this time showing an internal email chain. Bank transfers, signature logs, each tied to Edric. He paled. This is taken out of context. Context? I repeated. You transferred funds from my account to cover your expansion project in Jakarta. Marjorie's lips drew into a tight line. You built your empire on a void and expected me to applaud. The table went silent again. A man near the end of the table, one of the older directors, stood slowly. If these documents hold, what are your demands? I didn't hesitate. I will take my rightful seat on this board next quarter. I will begin an audit of all Hartfield shipping operations. Every file, every cent. A sharp inhale from someone. A low murmur followed. Marjorie stood. You're risking the legacy of this family. I met her eyes. Legacy isn't yours to protect when it's been constructed on lies. I slid the folder back into my bag and stood. Drayton followed, already collecting his notes. At the door, I turned back to the table. I'll see you in court, I said, or I'll see you on the front page. The latch clicked behind us. I didn't look back. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone expected you to leave quietly, but you stayed and spoke anyway? When was the last time you claimed what was yours, out loud? That night I received a box delivered to my door. No return address. Inside was a small recorder. I pressed play. Laughter. My father's. Followed by his voice. Unmistakable. She'll never survive this world. The courthouse loomed against the gray Portland sky. Its stone steps slick with last night's rain. I arrived early. The echo of my heels sharp against the marble floor. The charcoal suit felt heavier than its fabric, every thread a promise I intended to keep. The hallway hummed with quiet conversation and the faint click of pens. I stood out among the gray suits, scan card in hand, waiting for the security gate to buzz open. In the distance, I heard a voice that wasn't real but vivid, Edric's words from years ago. Replaying like a broken recording. I only have one child worth my name. It used to sting. Now it simply marked the beginning of my war. Drayton Cole and my legal team joined me at the entrance to the courtroom. Are you ready? He asked. I gave a small nod. I was born ready, just didn't know it until now. The double doors opened. The room smelled of old paper and power. Edric sat at the defendant's table. Back straight, jaw set. His hands were folded, his smile brittle. Marjorie sat beside him, pearls tight around her throat, eyes like frost. The judge entered. All rise. As the room stood, my eyes met Edric's. He looked calm, but I saw the twitch at his temple, the same one that appeared when he lost control. When we sat again, I placed my folder on the table, neatly aligned with the edge. It wasn't for show. It was control, mine. Reclaimed. The hearing began. Drayton rose first, projecting calm confidence. Your Honor, we will show a pattern of misappropriated funds, forged documents, and deliberate exclusion of the plaintiff, Ms. Aurelia Hartfield, from her rightful role in the company founded by her late father. Slides flickered to life on the monitor. Company records. Trust ledgers. Signatures missing mine. The gaps were louder than words. Marjorie cleared her throat, soft but poised. A clerical oversight. Surely, nothing intentional. I stood. An oversight doesn't erase someone for 14 years. I said, that's not an accident. That's design. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Edric rose, smooth as ever. My wife. Former wife, I corrected. His mouth twitched. She doesn't understand what she's doing. She's been manipulated. I didn't blink. I've been manipulated my entire life. Just not anymore. The gavel cracked once for silence. Then Drayton turned to the back of the courtroom. The plaintiff would like to call her first witness. A collective breath filled the air as the doors opened. Rowan Vance stepped inside. His resemblance to Edric was undeniable. But his eyes were softer. Steadier. He approached the stand, handed a USB drive to the clerk. My father ignored me most of my life. He began. He thought I wasn't listening. But I was. And I kept this. The screen lit up again. Edric's voice filled the room, sharp. Commanding. Venomous. If she finds the original will, we'll bury her. Quietly. Marjorie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Edric's face turned ashen, jaw locked in silent fury. The judge's gavel came down twice. Order. This evidence will be reviewed in full. The court will recess. The sound of shuffling papers followed. But I didn't move. I simply stared at Edric as the bailiff announced adjournment. This isn't about revenge, I said, my voice calm but carrying through the room. It's about accountability. His glare followed me as I turned and walked away. For the first time, he looked small. Outside, sunlight cut through the clouds, glinting off the cameras clustered near the steps. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs went off like fireworks. Miss Hartfield, do you regret bringing this case against your husband? I paused, facing them. Love is voluntary, I said clearly. I stayed because I believed. I act now because I'm awake. The silence that followed was almost reverent. I knew, even before the clip hit the air, that it would travel faster than anything Edric could spin. Hours later, in the backseat of the car, I watched his press conference. He stood before the same courthouse. Defiant. This is a smear campaign, he said, voice steady. An attack against a legacy my family built for generations. I muted the sound. Legacy built on silence was no legacy at all. I texted Drayton, next stage begins tonight. The estate was quiet when I arrived. The air felt heavy with waiting. I walked straight to the study, turned on the lamp, and opened my briefcase. The red folder, the Dell laptop, the evidence copies, all laid out like puzzle pieces falling into place. I stamped the top page. Exhibit A, Deception. The ink bled slightly on the paper. Red as truth. Tonight, I said to the empty room. I move from being the evidence to being the decision maker. I looked up at my reflection in the window. Dark against the lake beyond. My own eyes didn't flinch back anymore. Courage, I whispered, isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. I turned off the lamp. The papers glowed faintly in the moonlight, like secrets waiting to be revealed. Have you ever been cornered by someone else's truth, and found your own voice anyway? When you finally hold the proof, do you confront or collapse? What would you do when silence is no longer an option? The next morning, I opened my front door to find a plain envelope on the mat. No return address. Inside was a single document, yellowed at the edges. Ink faded but unmistakable. My father's handwriting, the original will. The buzz of my phone dragged me from sleep like a siren. Not once, not twice, nonstop. I blinked into the early gray light and reached for it. My name was everywhere. Every alert, every banner, every feed. Hashtag spoiled wife betrays legacy. My thumb hovered, then scrolled. Edited courtroom footage played on loop, me. Mid-expression, freeze framed with fury, lips twisted out of context. Spliced together like a villain reel. In one clip, it looked like I lunged across the bench at Edric. Laughable, if it weren't being believed. And then Linda Quinn's voice. Aurelia was always unstable. We used to worry she'd do something like this. She smiled at the camera. That polished calm hiding knives. My public image was bleeding out in real time. The phone rang. Drayton. They released partial clips. He said without preamble. Doctored. All of it. I stared at the wall. Let them, I said. I'll use their noise to speak louder. I sat up. Opened my laptop. The cursor blinked back like a challenge. I began drafting, line by line. Not a defense. A declaration. Somewhere between paragraph 3 and 4. I whispered aloud. Never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty. But the pig likes it. The next evening, I entered a news studio, not as the victim. Not as the accused. As the storyteller. Cynthia Hale, known for breaking truth wide open, greeted me with a nod. We go live in 10. Good, I replied, straightening my blazer. When the red light blinked on, I met the camera squarely. I was left at a train station at 4 a.m. I said, today, I'm not here to accuse, but to reveal. I told the truth, not all of it, just enough, about the red folder, the boardroom silence, the signatures that erased me. I showed documents, authenticated, timed, real. Cynthia asked questions, but mostly, she listened. Halfway through, a producer handed her a tablet. Edric's PR team had released a new video. They'd sliced my words again, cutting mid-phrase, distorting tone, making me look volatile. I smiled, small and steady. That edit, I said into the lens, will help prove tampering. The audience lit up, comments flooded in, threads flipped. For the first time, strangers stopped seeing a spoiled wife and saw a silenced daughter. By morning, #she tells the whole story was trending. And then Drayton called. Someone close to you leaked the documents. He said, Linda, again. I didn't flinch, just asked, where is she? An hour later, I was standing outside her condo. She opened the door with a glass of wine and a smirk. You look tired, she said. Why? I asked. She shrugged. Because people love a scandal more than a survivor. My voice lowered. Then let's give them both. Let them decide which one you are. I placed my phone face down on the counter, recording. She didn't notice. Marjorie paid me through her charity. Linda said, casual. It wasn't personal. You're just a better story when you lose. I said nothing, let the tape run, then walked away. That night, Drayton filed an injunction. The smear pieces were pulled within hours. News anchors began questioning the Vance family narrative. I didn't feel joy, or anger, just a quiet understanding. They can take my reputation. I murmured, but not my truth. And so, I streamed. I called it the 4 a.m. lesson. Just me, from my study, one camera, no crew. At 4 a.m., I told over 1 million viewers. No one came back for me. That's when I stopped waiting. I talked about manipulation that wears pearls. Gaslighting wrapped in inheritance. I talked about surviving when no one believes you because your abuser wears a tie and smiles in court. The comments were endless. Stories from across the country. Women, men, sons, daughters. I closed with Maya Angelou's words, still. I rise. Drayton texted 1 minute after the feed cut. You just turned the tide. I whispered into the silence. No, I just turned the light on. Have you ever watched lies spread faster than truth, and still chosen to stand your ground? What would you say if you finally got 1 minute of the world's attention? That same night, just before shutting down my screen, a message slid into my inbox. From Sable Kerrigan. Subject, we need to talk. It's about Edric. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the ticking of the clock over the mantel. Papers sprawled across my desk, bills, legal drafts, board minutes, all demanding attention. None deserving it. I sat there, fingers tracing the edge of the envelope that had arrived hours earlier. Plain, unmarked, unthreatening, but the handwriting on the back, will_original_Edric_hand, made my pulse skip. It could be nothing, or it could change everything. I slipped the USB drive into the laptop. The machine whirred to life. Its tiny camera light blinking in the dark room like an unblinking eye. A single folder appeared. I opened it, and my breath caught. There it was, Edric's handwriting. Unmistakable, slanted and deliberate. The amendment to the will. Written years ago, naming me the sole heir to Hartfield Shipping and its subsidiaries. Every denial, every insult, every boardroom whisper about my insignificance, all undone in one document. I leaned back, pulse hammering in my ears. My father's voice from that old cassette floated through memory. Steady and cold. The legacy is hers. Don't interfere. And over that memory, another quote surfaced. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Gloria Steinem had it right. Before I could even copy the file, my email pinged. A new message. Subject. You might want to see this. From Sable Kerrigan. The name pulled me upright. I clicked. Inside were attachments, photos, receipts, transcripts. Edric and Marjorie in hotel lounges. Bank accounts linked through shell charities. Transfers large enough to fund campaigns. Properties. Entire trust schemes. My stomach twisted as realization settled. The mistress and the mother-in-law had been in partnership all along. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound slicing through the silence. I stood, pacing. Every corner of the room suddenly too small to hold the fury clawing up my throat. The parallels hit hard. Me at the train station. Abandoned at 4 a.m. Shivering. Lost. Except this time, no one left me behind. This time, I was wide awake. I grabbed my phone. Hit Drayton's number. We have enough, I said, voice steady but cold. I'm ready to file. He paused. Once we file, they'll fight dirty. I'm not asking for revenge. I replied. I'm asking for rights. We spent the next 2 hours finalizing everything. The petition was straightforward, clean, irrefutable. The original will, the bank logs, Linda Quinn's confession. Every piece of deceit now turned evidence. Before sending, I hesitated, just long enough to remember everyone who'd stood beside me. My mother, Cora, who had reappeared not with apologies but with quiet strength. Merla, who had whispered encouragement when I doubted my own voice. Injustice rarely dies quietly, I murmured, but justice can choose its own roar. I clicked, send. The files went to the state auditor. Timestamped and sealed. A knock came almost immediately after. I opened the door to find Marjorie standing there. Her composure flawless as ever. Wrapped in pearls and frost. You've burned the bridge, she said simply. I met her gaze. I'm building a new one. She studied me for a long second, perhaps searching for the woman she used to dismiss. She didn't find her. Then she turned and walked away. Heels striking the marble like a metronome marking the end of an era. When the door closed, the quiet was soft again. I walked back to my desk, exhaled slowly, and sat by the window overlooking the lake. The city lights shimmered on the water. Restless and alive, I opened my leather journal and began to write. Tonight, I docked the ship they stole from me. I reached for the cassette player. Pressed play. My father's voice filled the room again, crackling. Distant, full of the finality of someone who knew his time was short. I listened, not for meaning this time, but for closure. When the tape clicked off, I placed the USB drive in my small home safe. On its label, I wrote a single word, truth. I locked it. My reflection in the glass was calm, unflinching. No more courtroom chaos, no more interviews, just quiet satisfaction, the kind born from knowing you've done the hard thing and survived it. They thought I couldn't fight, I said softly to the reflection. They were wrong. And maybe for the first time in years, I believed it. When you find the smoking gun, what do? Do you confront, or wait for the moment they do? Have you ever held the evidence that set you free? Tell me, when did you click send? As dawn began to edge the lake in silver, I reached for my phone again. A news alert blinked across the screen. Edric Vance under investigation for corporate fraud, hearing set Tuesday. The air was cool, laced with tension, as I stepped out of the black sedan and into the late morning light outside the federal courthouse. It was 9 a.m. sharp. My charcoal suit fit like steel, my red folder pressed firmly beneath my arm like a shield. I didn't hesitate, just walked through the doors as if I'd done it 100 times. Because in my mind, I already had. Inside, the room was a hive of breath and whispers. Reporters packed the benches. Board members craned to see me. My name floated across hushed conversations. My gaze didn't drift. I found my seat in the front row and waited. Edric entered last. He wore his usual stoicism like a mask. But his eyes scanned the crowd too fast. Too nervously. Marjorie followed, rigid as carved ice. The judge called the room to order. Drayton Cole rose with calm precision. He presented everything, our full arsenal, forged documents, hidden accounts, a timeline of manipulation crafted to exclude me from the legacy that was mine by blood and by right. The prosecutor spoke next. This is not about bitterness. This is about rightful ownership, justice, and the abuse of fiduciary power. I folded my hands and breathed deep. No trembling, no regret. This isn't revenge, I told myself. This is rescue. The judge's expression was unreadable. Then came the final statements. Edric stood. His voice was sharp but uneven. I built this company. I saved it. And this woman, she has disrupted more than she realizes. He pointed at me like I was a fire he couldn't put out. When I was called, I stood slowly. My heels echoed in the silence. I didn't come to destroy, I said, voice steady, clear. I came to claim what was mine, what was taken, hidden, rewritten. I am here to be counted. The room held its breath. The judge scribbled a few final notes, then lifted his gaze. Verdict, he said, gavel in hand. The plaintiff is awarded full and uncontested control of Hartfield Shipping Company. The defendant is referred for criminal review for financial misconduct and fraud. Gasps. Cameras flashed like fireworks. Edric didn't move. Marjorie's face went pale. My chest rose, then fell. A breath I hadn't realized I'd held finally escaped. Drayton leaned in as I walked past. You won. No, I said, my eyes straight ahead. I began. That evening, the Hartfield estate was calm. Inside, Eloise and Dr. Nolene Gray waited with 2 glasses of wine and a soft fire in the hearth. I raised my glass. To truth. To voice. To the daughter they forgot to count. Eloise beamed. Dr. Gray raised her glass back. Healing and justice walked in side by side today. I stepped to the window. The lake shimmered in the dusk. Silent and broad like a future without limits. I left that train station at 4 a.m. alone. I whispered. But today I walked into court not as a woman scorned, but as a woman restored. I placed my hand on the folder labeled Future and gently closed it. 2 days later, I stood before the press. Effective immediately, I said, Hartfield Shipping will transition into the Hartfield Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women and children abandoned by legal and emotional systems. Flashes burst around me, questions flew, but the old fear didn't rise. This is about rewriting endings, I said. Sometimes, we don't just survive, we choose the terms of our survival. I walked off the stage into light. Finally whole. Have you ever reached that moment where you could finally say, this is not the end, it's the beginning? If someone handed you the key to your own life, what door would you walk through first? Years later, I returned to Union Station at 4 a.m., not to wait for someone, but to begin the journey I chose. Union Station, 4 a.m. The cold bit at my fingertips as I stood on the exact same platform where everything once collapsed. The lamps flickered just like they had before, dim, reluctant. The silence was a mirror to that night. Empty, echoing. I walked toward the bench. The one I had sat on. Counting minutes, then hours. I reached into my coat and placed a single white rose on the metal seat. It rested softly, like a goodbye. You thought I'd remain here forever. I whispered, not to a person, but to the version of myself I'd left behind. A train pulled in. Its brakes hissed. Doors opened. I didn't move. The train waited. Then, without ceremony, the doors closed and it rolled away into the darkness. I turned around. My heels echoed against the concrete as I walked, not because someone called me, but because I no longer needed to be called. Have you ever returned to the place you were broken, just to prove you didn't live there anymore? As the first light broke the sky, I drove back toward the Hartfield estate. The lake shimmered in the early gold. Not a place of mourning anymore, but of rebirth. Inside, the staff buzzed gently as we prepared the east parlor. The curtains were pulled back. Microphones stood ready. I stepped up and faced the crowd of press, supporters, board members, and survivors who had joined this journey. I was once left behind. I began, at 4 a.m., on a cold bench in this city, invisible to someone who claimed to love me. Today, I stand visible, not for what I lost, but for what I've built. Applause rippled gently. This is the beginning of the Hartfield Foundation for Survivors, a space for those who've been abandoned, emotionally, financially, publicly. I glanced toward the rear of the room. Marjorie was absent. Edric was a headline now, not a threat. When someone shows you who they are, I continued, believe them the first time. I saw nods, tears, raised hands. I glanced at the hallway with the old Hartfield portraits. Generations of faces frozen in oil and silence. I smiled slightly. I'm rewriting this story. Later, in a quieter part of the estate, I met with my mother, Cora. She held an old family album, edges worn, corners bent. Inside were pictures I barely remembered, birthdays, garden walks, snow angels. She flipped to a page of me at 5 years old, wide-eyed, unaware. I left because I thought someone else could give you more than I could. She said, voice tight with memory. I understand now, I said. You left, but you came back. That's what matters. We sat close. No performance, just healing. This foundation, I added, it will catch others before they feel like they've vanished. We hugged, not to forget, but to forgive. Outside, I watched workers plant a new oak tree in the garden. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to let the pain write your story. That evening, I returned to my study. The view of the lake glowed beneath the moon, on the glass facade of the newly finished foundation building across the water. The name shimmered, Hartfield Foundation for Survivors. I placed the white rose from the train station into a crystal vase. Next to it, my laptop blinked with notifications. I recorded a message. To the ones still sitting on cold benches, wondering if someone will return, tomorrow. You get on a train, you drive. You don't wait anymore. I clicked, post. Thousands responded. Some with hearts, others with stories. One wrote, you just saved me from staying behind. I leaned back. The night was still, but my chest felt light. I am not the one to wait for anymore. I whispered to the dark. What would you do if you were handed the power to rewrite your past in one choice? What's the first step you'd take if the train was finally yours to drive? As dawn broke again over the lake, I stood at the window holding the rose, no longer wilted. I stepped outside. And into freedom. Union Station, 4 a.m. The cold bit at my fingertips as I stood on the exact same platform where everything once collapsed. The lamps flickered just like they had before, dim, reluctant. The silence was a mirror to that night, empty, echoing. I walked toward the bench, the one I had sat on, counting minutes, then hours. I reached into my coat and placed a single white rose on the metal seat. It rested softly, like a goodbye. You thought I'd remain here forever. I whispered, not to a person, but to the version of myself I'd left behind. A train pulled in. Its brakes hissed. Doors opened. I didn't move. The train waited. Then, without ceremony, the doors closed and it rolled away into the darkness. I turned around. My heels echoed against the concrete as I walked, not because someone called me, but because I no longer needed to be called. Have you ever returned to the place you were broken, just to prove you didn't live there anymore? As the first light broke the sky, I drove back toward the Hartfield estate. The lake shimmered in the early gold, not a place of mourning anymore, but of rebirth. Inside, the staff buzzed gently as we prepared the east parlor. The curtains were pulled back. Microphones stood ready. I stepped up and faced the crowd of press, supporters, board members, and survivors who had joined this journey. I was once left behind. I began, at 4 a.m., on a cold bench in this city, invisible to someone who claimed to love me. Today, I stand visible, not for what I lost, but for what I've built. Applause rippled gently. This is the beginning of the Hartfield Foundation for Survivors, a space for those who've been abandoned, emotionally, Financially. Publicly. I glanced toward the rear of the room. Marjorie was absent. Edric was a headline now, not a threat. When someone shows you who they are, I continued, believe them the first time. I saw nods, tears, raised hands. I glanced at the hallway with the old Hartfield portraits. Generations of faces frozen in oil and silence. I smiled slightly. I'm rewriting this story. Later, in a quieter part of the estate, I met with my mother, Cora. She held an old family album, edges worn, corners bent. Inside were pictures I barely remembered, birthdays, garden walks, snow angels. She flipped to a page of me at 5 years old, wide-eyed, unaware. I left because I thought someone else could give you more than I could. She said, voice tight with memory. I understand now, I said. You left, but you came back. That's what matters. We sat close, no performance, just healing. This foundation, I added, it will catch others before they feel like they've vanished. We hugged, not to forget, but to forgive. Outside, I watched workers plant a new oak tree in the garden. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to let the pain write your story. That evening, I returned to my study. The view of the lake glowed beneath the moon, on the glass facade of the newly finished foundation building across the water. The name shimmered, Hartfield Foundation for Survivors. I placed the white rose from the train station into a crystal vase. Next to it, my laptop blinked with notifications. I recorded a message. To the ones still sitting on cold benches, wondering if someone will return, tomorrow. You get on a train, you drive. You don't wait anymore. I clicked, post. Thousands responded. Some with hearts, others with stories. One wrote, you just saved me from staying behind. I leaned back. The night was still, but my chest felt light. I am not the one to wait for anymore. I whispered to the dark. What would you do if you were handed the power to rewrite your past in one choice? What's the first step you'd take if the train was finally yours to drive? As dawn broke again over the lake, I stood at the window holding the rose, no longer wilted. I stepped outside. And into freedom.